Okay, chapter 6, the triumph. I'm just going to warn you, it's going to be a bit of a roller coaster going forward here. So this is the morning of Charles's trial. There are 5 judges. Some of these things I have underlined like that. Could be quiz questions. When Charles Darnay is brought out, there are going to be 20 names along with his. Actually 23 names, but only 20 are responded for, are actually going to be there because 3 of them have already died. 1 died in jail. The other 2 were guillotined without a trial. So Charles is part of a group, and this is what happens every morning as they come out and they are presented before the jury. And typically they're immediately found guilty and sent to their death. So this describes some of what I just basically said to you. There's sort of a description of what happens to people typically as they are sent out of the conciergerie to go to their trial. The conciergerie, again, is the prison where people are held right before their trial, and they're in a common room generally. So just remember that these are the aristocrats, and so they treat each other well. So it says here that 15 prisoners were put to the bar before Charles Darnay was called, and that process took only an hour and a half. And then Charles Darnay comes before the group, and it says that there's a jury that looks very turbulent and eager. There's a description here of all the people who are watching besides the jury. So this is like the entertainment for the day. We have lots of the public here. It references people who are eating and drinking, and of course many of the women are knitting. It also says that the Defarges are also there, but they never look towards him, and I do think that's an important detail. They seem to be waiting for something with a dogged determination, and they looked at the jury, but nothing else. So that's also kind of curious. These kinds of phrases by Dickens are meant to keep us a little nervous and also to keep us reading. So Dr. Manette is there, dressed normally in sort of his quiet, they describe his quiet dress, plain clothes, and Mr. Laurie too. They're the only 2 men who are not wearing revolutionary type clothing, which is like the red hats with the ribbons and all of that. So it says that he is accused by the public as an emigrant whose life was to be forfeited to the Republic under the decree which banished emigrants on pain of death. It didn't matter when that decree was made because all that matters is that Darnay is there now, and this is the law. And everybody yells, "Take off his head, he's an enemy." And then the president asks the prisoner some questions. They asked Charles Darnay whether it was true that he had lived many years in England, and Charles says, yes, it was. So doesn't that mean he's an emigrant if he lived in England? And, if not, what does he call himself? And Charles says he's not an emigrant in the spirit of the law. I mean, technically, yes, he's an emigrant because he's a French citizen who left and went to England. But that's not the spirit of the law in his mind. He explains that he had voluntarily relinquished a title that was distasteful to him and a station that was distasteful to him, and had left his country. He submitted before the word emigrant in the present acceptation by the tribunal was in use to live by his own industry in England rather than on the industry of the overladen people of France. So he left not to escape any sort of guilt in terms of how he treated people, which is what a lot of the aristocrats did. He left because he did not want to be that kind of a landowner, and he didn't want to be involved in a system that treated people that way. And so he went to England to make his own living doing honest work, which of course no aristocrats have really ever done before. And then he brings forth 2 witnesses. One is Theophile Gabelle. So this would have been the man who worked for his uncle, the Marquis, as a tax collector. And then Alexandra Manette, which is Dr. Manette. The president asks to clarify, that he had gotten married in England, and he says yes, but not to an English woman. He marries a citizen of France whose by birth a French citizen, and she is Lucy Manette, the doctor's daughter. So this immediately puts him in a much safer place. Suddenly he is married to, which, I mean, we know this, but, all the people make the connection that he is the son-in-law of Dr. Manette, and that Dr. Manette, of course, is a hero because of how he suffered in prison. So this brings about a whole change in the audience. Everybody starts to cheer and cry with happiness, and tears are rolling down their cheeks because they have so much passion and feeling for him. And they create a sort of juxtaposition here. They're talking about like how moved the people are, and how quickly they can flip from having love for somebody to wanting to kill them, which is, of course, that's the truth. The president asks, why did Charles return to France when he did and not sooner? And Charles explains that he had no means of living in France except for those that he had resigned, whereas in England he had an honest job. He was instructing people in French and literature. He returned when he did to save a citizen's life and to bear his testimony at whatever personal hazard to the truth. Was that a criminal? He asks them. So he's coming back, as we remember, because he wants to defend Gabelle, who's been, he believes, unjustly imprisoned. And he doesn't want to be, any part of the working structure of that country. He didn't want to be having peasants doing work for him. He wanted to do his own work, is what he clarifies here. So everybody yells out, no, no. So the accused explained that the citizen was his first witness. So this is Gabelle, and Gabelle comes out. He explains to the court that he has been slightly overlooked in prison, which, I mean, honestly, that's a blessing for him, because if he hadn't been overlooked, he might have been killed already. But with all the other killing and all the other prisoners, he hasn't really been paid any attention to, except for just 3 days ago when he's summoned to come in as this witness. So this is, we can assume this is good news for Gabelle as well, because he's going to be associated now with Dr. Manette. And that there's not much else really said here. He just basically acknowledges that he had been a servant of Darnay's family, and that he is not of the aristocracy. And then Dr. Manette is questioned next, and people are so excited just by Dr. Manette's presence. And he explains just all the things we already know, that the accused had remained in England, always faithful and devoted to his daughter and himself, that so far from being in favor with the aristocrat government there, he had actually been tried for his life by it as the foe of England and friend of the United States, as he brought these circumstances into view with the greatest discretion and with a straightforward force of truth and earnestness. The jury and the populace became one. So this trial that he faced in England actually helps him in this situation too, because it shows that, he was sort of targeted as an aristocrat, but was innocent of any wrongdoing in that trial. So the fact that, two countries now could potentially acknowledge that he's not truly an aristocrat in the way he behaves, helps the jury and the people realize that he's one of them, that he also rejects the way things were done and the way the peasants were treated. So the jury declares that they are ready with their votes if the president would like to receive them, and unanimously the jury agrees that he is innocent and that he should be set free. So, this happens very quickly. Very exciting. Obviously, as a reader, we're relieved for him, of course. Then, when they leave the prison, they are surrounded by the people who've been watching the trial, and of course the people outside as well. Welcome them. They're cheering. They're parading him. They want to walk with him home. They want to put Charles up on their shoulders and carry him all the way back to his house. So they literally have a parade with Charles that would be the same as a revolutionary parade, and of course it's also the same kind of parade they would have if they were taking people to the guillotine. So just the extremity of their emotions here, it just reiterates how much passion influenced the behaviors of all the peasants. But it does say here that everybody who had been in court is in this crowd except for two. So two people, we can infer that would be the Defarges, because the Defarges were in court, but they weren't looking at Charles. And they also seemed to be a little bit distanced in just their behavior. So for some reason, they are not celebrating. So I think that's cause for concern. Darnay himself, as he's being carried home, is confused because he recognizes that the fervor with which they are celebrating him is the same way that they celebrate people when they're taking them to their death. So he's just uncomfortable. I'm sure he's very excited to get home. So they take him all the way to where he lives. Dr. Manette has gone ahead to prepare Lucy. And as soon as Charles is put down on the ground, Lucy is there and she drops insensible into his arms. And then we have a very touching scene. The people are dancing. They eventually leave and they continue on with this Carmagnole parade. They lift up somebody and call her a goddess of liberty. It's just the parade continues without Charles, and Charles is left at home. And everybody celebrates. Charles says to Lucy, "I am so safe." And Lucy says, "Charles, let me thank God for this on my knees as I have prayed to him." And then they go upstairs to their room. And the first thing Charles says is, "You must speak to your father, dearest. No other man in all this France could have done what he has done for me." She laid her head upon her father's breast as she had laid his poor head on her own breast long, long ago. So everything has come full circle. He has been able to provide for her what she provided for him. He is happy in the return he has made her. He was recompensed for his suffering. He was proud of his strength. "You must not be weak, my darling," he remonstrated. "Don't tremble. I have saved him." So this just reminds us how much Dr. Manette has changed as a character. So the important details here, and this is pretty easy to understand, this particular chapter, is Charles is released. Gabelle and Dr. Manette are the witnesses. They are confirming that Charles rejected his noble title and his country for honest labor in England. And as a son-in-law of Dr. Manette, he clearly has special status, and the people flip completely in the opposite direction and support him, love him like a hero. So the next chapter, A Knock at the Door, continues in Mr. Lorry's home and also in the little apartment that Lucy and Charles and Miss Pross are renting. And it says right away in the beginning here that even though he's home safe, Lucy is still nervous. She's trembling. She has a vague but heavy fear upon her, which I would take to mean that she's having a premonition. She's definitely not relaxed that all is over and everything is fine. Her father believes everything is fine. He also seems completely well. He's not having any relapses. He's completely confident and strong. It describes here how they're living in Paris. So they're very mindful of the fact that during a revolution, things are scarce. Food for sure would be scarce, and people don't have a lot of money. I mean, the peasants have taken over everything, and the aristocracy has left. The peasants didn't have anything to begin with, so they're very careful not to be too showy in the way they live their life. So it does say that their life is frugal because it's the safest way to live. It involves the least offense to people. And also it clarifies that Lucy and Charles are not rich. Throughout this imprisonment, he had to pay for his food. He had to pay for his guards. So because of all this, because they're trying to hang on to their money and also not draw attention, they don't have any servants. So the servant is Jerry. So remember, Jerry was Mr. Lorry's servant, but Mr. Lorry has basically given Jerry to Charles and Lucy and Dr. Manette. And so that's where he is spending his time. He sleeps there now. This is an interesting detail, and this is based on what actually happened. The revolutionaries made it a law that you had to write above the door the names of all the people who lived in every dwelling. And so Mr. Jerry Cruncher's name was written over the door of Dr. Manette and Lucy's apartment. And as soon as Charles is released, his name is being painted above the door. It says that Dr. Manette had employed a painter to add to the list the name Charles Evermond called Darnay. So now he's been labeled as living in that place. It explains that Jerry Cruncher and Miss Pross go out every night to get food for the evening and the next day. And so they're going to markets and small shops. They're buying things in small quantities to avoid attracting notice and to give as little occasion as possible for talk and envy was the general desire of their behavior. And it describes the two of them and the way they go about it. Miss Pross apparently does know some French because she apparently had, it says down here, a long association with a French family, and yet she rejects their language. She refuses to speak it. She calls it nonsense. And she's very offensive when she goes to the shops. She just like blurts out a single noun, like potato or something like that, and points to what she wants. She picks up the food that she wants and starts to bargain for it. And this is something that today is very offensive. You're not supposed to touch any produce or any food in a market. You're supposed to just gesture to it and ask how much it is or tell the purveyor what you want. So the fact that she picks it up like this and, puts her hands on the food would be very offensive. And of course, it would force the market or the purveyor to bargain with her because they're not going to want her to put it back. So she holds it up and she always offers one less number, like if it's €3, she would say 2 or something, or francs in that period of time. So she's always bargaining for the food. And it also references here that Jerry Cruncher no longer has rust under his fingers. He's obviously busy in France. He's not grave robbing anymore. And the first thing Miss Pross says is, well, we have to make sure we get wine because they want to celebrate Charles's freedom. And they talk about drinking and they make jokes about the quality of the wine and they make jokes about the people who only care about murder and mischief. And Lucy keeps scolding them, saying, you can't say those things when you get outside the door. You can't say things like that because they're going to cause, people to get angry. So finally they leave. And it says here, I'm glad you have so much of the Englishman in you, though I wish you had never taken that cold in your voice, said Miss Pross approvingly. But the question, Dr. Manette, is there any prospect yet of our getting out of this place? So she's asking Dr. Manette, how long do we have to stay here? Can we leave yet? We'd rather not have to keep going to the markets and buying this food and worrying about things. Can we just go home? And Dr. Manette says, no, it's still too dangerous for Charles. And I would wonder why. And part of me thinks, if he's been declared no longer a threat and he's no longer an enemy, isn't it best to get out of town as fast as possible? But when you think about how war-torn France was, not only because the revolution was everywhere in the country, not just in Paris, but that the borders were a bit insecure because some European countries were angry with France for what they were doing, the fact that they had killed their king. And so travel in general would be dangerous. So finally, they leave to go to the market. And as they leave, Lucy and Dr. Manette and little Lucy are left there Mr. Laurie's not there. He's at the bank. And of course, Charles is there. And all of a sudden, Lucy just jumps and she says, "What is that?" And her father says, "What? There's nothing. Why are you so upset?" And she says, I thought I heard strange feet upon the stairs. And all of a sudden, there's pounding on the door. And Lucy's reaction is, "Oh, hide Charles. Save him." And the doctor says, Don't be so panicked. I have saved him. There's nothing wrong. Let's just go answer the door." And when they answer the door, 4 men in red caps armed with sabers and pistols come into the room. So clearly, Lucy had probably an appropriate response when she said hide him, because the first thing they say is the citizen Evermond called Darnay, and Darnay says, "Who seeks him?" And the man says, "We seek him. I know you, Evermond. I saw you before the tribunal today. You are again the prisoner of the Republic." So he hasn't even been home 1 full day, and they're taking him again. So they surround him where he stands with Lucy, and little Lucy clinging to him. And he says, "Tell me how and why I am again a prisoner." And they say, "It is enough that you return straight to the conciergerie, and you will know tomorrow. You are summoned for tomorrow." So they're going to call him back before the tribunal the very next day. Dr. Manette is very upset. He says, "You know him. You have said, do you know me?" He's like, "Do you know who I am? I'm Dr. Manette. You guys shouldn't be doing this. This is my son-in-law." And they say, "Yes, we know you, citizen doctor." And he says, "Well, then how does this happen? If you know me and you know he's my relative and that he's had this trial and he's been set free, how on earth does this happen?" And they explain to him that he has been accused by Saint Antoine. So Saint Antoine is a neighborhood. This is interesting. It's like, how does a place accuse somebody? And the doctor says, of what? What has he been accused of? And they say, reluctantly, "Ask no more. If the Republic demands sacrifices from you, without doubt, you, as a good patriot, will be happy to make them." So they're saying, if we need you to protect him or something, or to testify, we'll call you. And the doctor says, "Well, will you tell me who denounced him?" And the first one says, "It's against the rule, but you can ask him of Saint Antoine here." So one of the men is actually from that neighborhood. And the doctor turned his eyes upon that man, who moved uneasily on his feet, and finally at length said, "Well, it's against the rule, but he's denounced by citizen and citizeness Defarge, and by one other." So now we know why Madame and Monsieur Defarge were acting so strangely at the trial, why they were not out in the streets celebrating when Charles was set free. They had other plans, and now they have accused him of something, and he's going back to prison. We don't know who the other one is. The first person I think of is the Vengeance, which is what I wrote down here, but we don't know yet, and that's another reason that, Dickens wants us to keep reading. I'm sure we'll find out. What other? Do you ask, citizen doctor? Yes. Then, said he of Saint Antoine with a strange look, "You will be answered tomorrow. Now I am dumb." So they're leaving us hanging with this mystery of who is the third person who has accused Darnay of some other crime. So this is the important details here, just that the Defarges, they obviously had a plan, and they've executed it. And we will find out in the next chapter what this new accusation is.